Okay. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome to this week's The Now podcast. My name's Duncan. I'm going to be leading the session. Never introduced ourselves that way, but here we are. And the question that we want to pose this week is the question of self-awareness. And what we want to ask is self-awareness just being present in time and space and sharing energies. Anyone want to lead off?
I I've been reading a really interesting book this week, which is why I was being slightly not deliberately disagreeing with what you said, Molly. I do agree with what you said on the group chat. But I've been reading a guy called Uspensky, who was a Russian philosopher who studied under another guy called Gurdjieff, who was a slightly mysterious and sort of mischievous character. Anyway, the book, I stopped reading it because it actually made me cry. Because he keeps going on about how people are machines and everyone's asleep, and it was a bit depressing. But he does talk about this notion of awareness beyond the individual, and this notion of, because we're so wrapped up in our race and gender and especially politics and da 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 and these little boxes, it's very easy, I think, to lose sight of this, without sounding too esoteric, the witness, I think is what I called it, which is mentioned in Indian philosophy and many different philosophies. So this notion of, and I know we've all probably experienced this when we're acting, where you are in the character, but you are aware of what's going on, but there's no mentation too much. There's no conscious thought, and um, there's no identity with specificity. It's almost just watching. And for me, that version, if you like, of self-awareness is the one where there isn't any judgment. It's literally a bit like when we talk to your baby River. He's just there. He's present. He's not criticizing me. He's not thinking about Donald Trump. He's just present, and that's so refreshing. He might be thinking about Donald Trump. I hope not. But anyway, so for me, it's that notion of the purity of that state, which is not necessarily meditative. I think you can be awake and cognizant. And for me, that's what I would, at its most profound level, self-awareness is that. But maybe I've gone a little bit too big.
I don't think it's too big. I wonder if we can just kind of bring it back to why this question came up and why I suppose we were talking in the group chat about self awareness, right? Because usually what we're finding, we all work the Now. If anyone hasn't heard before, is a communications training for anyone and everyone, whether you are wanting to date, whether you're in business, whether you want to practice public speaking. And one thing that comes up hugely for all of us, right, is self awareness with clients and presence with clients. And what I was saying in this group chat is what I find a lot in clients is they go, I'm really aware of what I'm doing to the point where I'm like judging myself for it, or I'm really aware of what I'm doing to the point where I feel like I cannot breathe because I feel like all of my mental energy is like observing me. And I totally hear what you're saying, David. Or if I'm right, I'm going to translate that into what I think I'm hearing, which is if we are truly self aware, that witness or that judgment isn't actually self awareness. It's something that comes after self awareness. Is that, am I understanding you correctly with this idea of people who are like self aware to the point of subconscious? You would argue that's not true self awareness for them in that moment.
Yeah, just to very quickly answer that. Yeah, so I'll give you an example from my experience. So sometimes when you're drawing, so I do a lot of drawing. When you're drawing, you're in the flow, and it doesn't have to be drawing, but I'm just going to take that as an example. And you don't know why, but the lines are perfect, and you step back, and then, oh, that's brilliant, or oh, that's not what I thought it would be. And it happens in performance as well. But when you're right in the coalface of the middle of Hamlet or a charcoal drawing or flower, it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be creative. Could be writing something, could be writing someone a letter, could be having a conversation, could be making a cup of tea. But when you're right in the flow, there isn't any, the left or right, I can't remember, the language part of the brain subsides, and you're just, me and Duncan were talking about this earlier actually in the car yesterday. You're just doing. It's like that great Master Yawashaba when he's a famous Japanese martial artist when he became enlightened, he just said, I chop water, I pour wood. And they were like, well, I chop wood, I pour water, sorry. And they were like, what are you talking about? And it was just this moment of total awareness. And I'm just, there's no mentation anymore. I'm just acting. So that's what I meant. But, and I think when people, and I totally know what you're saying, Molly, and I know I find this with acting and other things as well, is there is a tendency to feel, because you are suddenly being aware of yourself and noticing your performance or whatever it might be, or your interview style or your dating patter or stand-up stuff, because you maybe for the first time you're actually looking at it more closely, there is a tendency to be like, I think one of the stages is being self-conscious about it, because you're like, oh God, I didn't know I was doing that. Oh my God, I keep like blinking, or I'm always using my hands weirdly. And then when you get over that, then you can get into, which I think is probably maybe heading towards mastering something or getting better. Sorry, that was a long answer.
I was this close to like, and just going back really quickly because I want to get Brittany involved in this conversation as well. But the interesting part about children, babies, and being self-aware and being present, I also just wanted to riff off that because I do think that there's no filter with babies. I want this, therefore I try and get it. That is the basic needs of self-awareness. But I wonder as you grow, does self-awareness have anything to do with the other as well in the space? I always say, for example, if you're living in a big metropolitan city, it's really beneficial to have some viewpoints training of topography, other people in the space, architecture, which is being present to your physical and physical whereabouts and know-how in the space. So I wonder if being present is the first step, but then if you can't assume that everyone's had this training, so it needs to be placed on the other person as well. If this person's walking down the street this way, how am I going to be present? Will I be maybe present in myself, but will I be able to get their presence in the moment as well? So I wonder how much of it is actual internal versus placed within the other in the space.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on this actually. One was that as we started this conversation and I was sitting here and I had the thought in my head of going, wow, this is really ironic that we're talking about this today because I am so overly exhausted that I feel like I am not even on this call at all. And so that I was suddenly laughing to myself inside, going, okay, but now what are you doing to arrive in this call? What are you doing to get yourself to the place of being engaged on this call? And so I think there was something of, I was having this self-awareness that I was not present within that moment. And so then therefore I could then act on the fact of what was it that I needed to do. And to your point, Duncan, I just leaned into exactly what you said. I said, okay, listen to what David is saying, listen to what Molly is saying, then you will be able to engage in what's going on within this moment. I had a very fascinating moment happen this week at work where I was in an audition room and I was auditioning some people and I asked for a piece of feedback from someone, just one word, and they had this moment of complete panic where suddenly the word escaped them and they felt all this pressure that this one word that they had was suddenly gone from their brain. And so what they did was they physically retreated away from the group, away from the work, started to not really be able to breathe and started to flap their hands in a way that was, you could see their body was having a very, very strong response to that and also detaching from that present moment. They were drifting further and further away from that moment. And one of my colleagues just said, plant your feet, don't escape us, come back to us, breathe. What's the word? And they did all of those things. And then the word came, no problem. And so this idea of, similarly to what I did at the beginning of this call, to what that student did in that moment, in that audition, of them being able to, okay, arrive in this moment, land, plant those feet, breathe, and listen to the question that's being asked of you, listen to the people who are talking in this chat, and that will help you to be able to respond to it. So I think to your point, Duncan, I think the listening aspect of it, I think, can maybe be a tool to help with being more present. It can be a tool to help increase I was gonna, not increase self-awareness, but increase the presence within that moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I don't think you're alone with or that person's experience is a great one because it's in like this high pressure environment, right? If they're being auditioned for something, your body's going to react and like really, there's just no hiding that. But I see it all the time in teams masking that panic in so many different ways, whether it's like chewing a pen while on a call or like adjusting and typing and looking like somewhere else on a Zoom call and not having that connection this way. And I thought what reminded me of this question when you said it, Duncan, is when I was training to be a coach, a mentor of mine was talking about this idea of this 50-50 split, because I think sometimes when we think about being present in communication, I just think, okay, I need to be totally on the other. And that can be really helpful. But then if we're not carrying that own sense of awareness, I don't realize, how close I am to someone else. I'm not then aware of how I'm protecting their energy through how I'm communicating with my body language, with my words as well. And when I was training to be a coach, they would always talk about this idea of it needs to be this kind of 50-50 split. But then when that person is moving into more of a monologue or they are teaching you, maybe it needs to be more of like a 60-40 or 70-30 split then on you. And it's this constant kind of dance between this self-awareness of myself, but not holding on to it too tightly. So I let them in. And then when I go to speak, maybe I need to make sure, especially if it's a difficult conversation, I have even more self-awareness maybe when talking about it. So I think it's a really difficult thing to do, obviously, because that's what we train, and we haven't mastered it. Well, I definitely haven't mastered it, and I don't want to speak for all of you, but I don't think any of us have really mastered that in ourselves. And I think it's something that is an ongoing dance between the self-awareness of myself and how I am in space and how I'm reacting to others around me.
I mean, it's a life's work, though. I mean, again, many people have said this notion of, to your point, you never stop learning. I mean, I said to my mum the other day, if Leonardo da Vinci said on his deathbed, I've wasted so much time, you do worry. You think, oh, okay. But just to your point about difficult conversations, I've noticed my practice now, especially with sobriety, is being really present and certainly doing physical work. And I had a very interesting example today, which made me laugh. The thing about being present is it allows you space to take decisions as to how you react. So I'm someone who used to have one hell of a temper and I used to just react, bang, I didn't have any control over it. I'm a lot better now. So anyway, I'm chopping this piece of wood in my front garden with my little saw, and this lovely old gentleman sort of walks over to me because we're right opposite a bus stop, and he looks at me and he goes, you're not a professional carpenter, are you? And I was like, okay. He said, your strokes, they're far too short. You need to do long strokes. And of course there was part of me going, whatever one might say to someone like that, but he said it with such a benevolent smile. And I went, no, I'm actually not a professional carpenter. And he looked at me and smiled and went, I'm only kidding. He was just teasing me. I mean, but he was right. They were little funny strokes and it could have been a bit, but instead of reacting and saying whatever one might want to say in a street in South London, in the finest, Anglo-Saxon, I had space to gauge him and go, he wasn't being malicious. He wasn't being critical. He was actually just ribbing me. And it was actually lovely and refreshing. So this point, to your point, Duncan, and the things that you said, by having the space to be able to take a moment and then react to the other, you have choices. I could have told him to, but I didn't. I stepped back and I went, oh, you're actually, and I had also had the clarity to assess that he wasn't being, I noticed the emotional intention, and obviously going back to performance, that's so important, but life is a performance in many ways, isn't it? So, I turned up as my best self because I had the option to be, and he just smiled and walked away and went and got his bus and whatever, and I just carried on doing what I was doing.
Yeah, it's a constant battle of head and heart, right? We all are very emotionally driven people, I reckon, in some capacity, but there needs to be a connection with head and heart, and that just takes practice and time. Going back, so if you reacted initially, then that's an emotional response versus taking the time where you felt the emotions, you gave yourself the space, and then you proceeded. Going back to what Brittany was saying about It just seems like removing anxiety is the answer to a lot of this being present question. And what does that mean? Because if you add anxiety, then you make it about yourself. I'm messing up my line. I'm messing up this moment. Instead of like, no, 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 we're sharing this space together. This is just, there doesn't need to be anxiety filled. And then when you add the anxiety, then the pressure builds up. Then rather just, no, 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 just, it's called, and I don't want to be crude, but it's, I mean, it is what it is. It's called living in the shit. Just live in the shit for a minute. The shit sounds like a long time when you're a stand-up comedian, you forgot your next bit and you, oh my God, now what? No, 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 just live in it. It's okay. Have a connection for one second. You have their attention. People are going to be invested, and it's a lot happening still, and that might then trigger you into the next segue. I had one more thing I wanted to say. Anxiety. Anyways, I'll shush for now. It'll come to me and then I'll interrupt the person talking. Anyone else?
Live in the shit, Duncan. Live in the shit.
I love it.
There we go. There we go.
You know what to call
Um,
the podcast.
yeah, exactly, exactly. But yeah, I know it's so hard, and I really do think it's getting harder and harder. This is, I apologize if this is going off topic, but I really think it's getting harder to have the self-awareness or to accept that, I can be confronted with the self-awareness that I've lost my moment in this or I don't know this answer, because we live in a world where information is everywhere, and the social media promotes this idea of like get rich quick, or I have my life together. It's London Marathon tomorrow as we're recording this. When did everyone stop running marathons? Like it's a normal 5K park run. Like everyone I know is running this marathon. And I think that really isn't helpful with our own anxieties when it comes to our self-awareness, because we are viewing so much of other people's lives that when it comes to this idea of finding self-awareness, for me anyway, I think that judgment is just something that naturally is always going to come up, especially in today's environment, because you've gone from 10 minutes ago, you've seen someone with like the perfect life, and now you're looking at your own kind of situation in yourself, and you're going to naturally constantly be comparing depending on what you're consuming. So
I,
it's tough.
but remembering that social media, of course, is an advertisement for
Hmm.
the perfect life. It's actually almost, and I don't, this is might be a bit too general, and maybe I'll funnel myself down here, but it just seems so anti-human because having the perfect life. Look at my perfect Sunday roast, out on a walk. I did my 5 to 10K. Look at my perfect, household and like, it's just, it's instead of like going through the shit and like, oh, I had a rough day. And but so you have to remember that social media is an advert for the best life. And that's why it's like kind of the death of comparison, right? Because like, well, I had a bad day. Well, it's fine. This person probably had a bad day too. It's not even a snippet of a moment of, it's not even a sand grain on the hourglass of what a day is. That snippet, that 10-second video, if you count down how many seconds there are in a day. Going back to what you were saying, Molly, this is what I was trying to remember earlier about the conversation and the flowing. Yeah, it is always a give and take as well, right? Because and that's what kind of and that just takes practice, right? You don't want it to become a one-way friendship, because then is that even a friendship? No, you want, because if you're a friend that's always monologuing, you're like, do this person care about my point of view or like have a response? Like, why am I just monologuing here? Versus like having that back and forth, which we've talked about before in this podcast, of the flow, and it is 50-50, and sometimes it is this person needs more space, and that comes with again, the lack of anxiety within yourself. Just funnel yourself out if you can, and that kind of is what we can do with the now training, and just put the energy into the other person and then respond accordingly. And then that conversation that would probably start 50-50 without any given circumstances of what is happening between these two parties might turn into a 70-30, might turn into a 90-10 for a quick monologue, And then it's always, if you are completely present, and then that self-awareness within yourself, but then also in the other person, it naturally flows, and the ebb and flow turns into a dialogue.
I mean, as someone who didn't grow up with social media, I mean, I was born in 1975, so that's a little while ago. I didn't have a TV till I was 9. So I think your point is very well made, Molly, and the way to tie this back potentially to what we're talking about is it's almost as if social media is a breeding ground for anti-self-awareness because people are so interested. Well, as I get older, I literally don't care what anyone thinks, which is so freeing. But like, yeah, this whole comparison, it's so dangerous and damaging to one's own mental health and self-care. And one of the things that I've noticed since I've deleted both LinkedIn and Instagram off my mobile phone is I feel happier. But also the moments I spend in isolation, I seek solitude. And again, I had a long conversation with my dear mother the other day about, she said, I don't really socialize much anymore. I see my sister, a few other people. And I was like, how is that? She said, it's great because I feel very, very comfortable in my own company. And that, I think, is such a profound thing. And I'm starting to find that myself, that I'm really contented. Just sometimes I talk to myself or sing to myself, and that's okay too, you know. And I don't need to be constantly surrounded by this social world. I can do that, and that I'm not agoraphobic, maybe mildly, but you know, not really. So your point is brilliantly made, Molly. This notion, and I'm not saying social media is, you know, is the devil's work. I mean, it kind of is, but no, I mean, it has its place. But I think again, it's about all of this. My brother says it very well as well. You know, watch your media, be careful, don't over imbibe, because it does become a little rabbit hole, and we've all gone down there, and suddenly you're like, oh my God, where's the real world gone? Yeah, so it's a well-made point.
I'm gonna play some devil's advocate in that and just for some context here, I'm you know, I'm someone who works many hours of the day. I don't have TikTok. I don't have Snapchat. I have Instagram. I don't go on YouTube. I don't, so I'm not really a big social media person to begin with. But I've been talking to a few people, and I think that I am also one of these people that, to some degree, and a moment of actively choosing to not be present as a means of coping, as a means of managing anxiety, as a means of maybe strategically disassociating from the present moment, social media can actually provide that. So I know that I can be someone who maybe I'm, you know, I mean, I can go specific right now of someone who's dealing with postpartum, and I can have a moment in postpartum, my hormones were all over the place. And so then I can feel this moment where the hormones in my body are feeling like I don't have control over them anymore. And so I'm feeling, if I were to really tap into being present in that moment, I would probably be flipping tables and throwing dishes. And sometimes what I could do as a means of calming myself down was I could just scroll and scroll. And of course, my algorithm, you know, everyone has a different algorithm, and mine is really babies and musical theater and recipes and traveling. Like, there's nothing about it. It's like watching a like home and garden network is essentially what my algorithm is. So to a degree, I can strategically, if I want, also use it as a means of disassociating from the present moment to be able to get back to the present moment in a way that I feel is actually more useful, helpful, effective within whatever it is that I am managing in that precise moment.
I definitely hear you and agree. All I'm going to do as a little caveat to that is I personally know how long your days are, and it's almost like that's a perfect little mwah. Like, but some people can't stop at one glass of wine to have a comparison. It's still an addiction in a way. It's still an addiction to the phone, right? But so you're someone who can scroll for 10 minutes and be like, I'm good. I've got my little bit and bob. And that's great. Honestly, that's awesome. But for someone who also is sober, it is some people can't stop at one, and so it's a nice balance, right? To have that as a tool, to use it actively as like I am choosing this moment to disassociate for a short period of time. And that's if that's what you need it for, brilliant. Some people read, some people watch films, some people go out to restaurants, and that's their form, I suppose. But it's just some people will scroll and then like, oh, 3 hours have gone by and you didn't even notice because you've been so invested. Let's use the word invested in your reels or videos, etc. So
Mm.
again, devil's advocate to your devil's advocate.
I think what you're right. And one of the things I'm learning, and this is actually a part of sort of self-care, and I think I spoke to Brittany about it, and I spoke to a few people about it. One of the things I've noticed, I'm coming to 600 days of sobriety, which is great, but the emotions are still all over the place. And I often weep like in the mornings, and that's not where I want to be. But I'm like, I don't know what to do. I literally, and it's not even like I'm really upset or depressed. It's just emotion coming out of me. And it's not every morning, and it's not something I worry about. But you're absolutely right. There's sometimes the present is not a place where you want to be because it's like, what? It's 5 in the morning, and I'm like, and that I think a distraction. So for me, yeah, watching a film would be my thing, or watching something funny. Like I start watching The Office again because it just makes me howl with laughter. And I need to howl with laughter sometimes, and that's important. So I totally agree with you because there's no way I'm starting drinking again because that would have been my thing. I'm feeling depressed. Let's have a drink. Oh, now I feel more depressed, and I don't want to, it's anyone's business, whatever they want to do. But for me, it's like, yeah, I think being self-care and being kind to yourself with this work is so important because it's not easy. This journey is not easy.
I think also to just link it back to, some of the work that we do to go, okay, so what if I'm in a work environment and I have that type of response and I can't go and scroll for 10 minutes to be able to, I don't have that option available to me. What is it that I can then actually do in that moment to be able to have what might be a similar effect, but is still, something that I can activate in that exact moment for whatever it is that I need. And as we're talking about this, it's making me think that maybe there's something about being more specific about this self-awareness as well, because you can have physical self-awareness, emotional self-awareness, gestural self-awareness. Molly was talking about spatial relationship awareness. And so I feel like there's also so many lanes to this, and that maybe we also all as individuals are stronger in one particular lane than another lane, or depending on the context that we're in, we can have an increased maybe physical self-awareness. Maybe if it's, you're in an environment where you're meeting someone for the first time and you have butterflies in your stomach and you're attracted to them, then maybe suddenly your physical self-awareness is just like going through the roof of like, I'm sweating or I'm nervous. Oh no, do I smell? So suddenly you're so focused on that versus another environment where maybe you're intellectually being challenged. So then suddenly are you extremely self-aware of just what your thoughts are, what you can bring to the table, or of, again, what probably comes up a lot, I know for my clients and for all of us, are when you're in an environment where you have to be speaking in front of other people. So suddenly this really hyper awareness of my mouth, it suddenly is starting to get dry. I can suddenly start hearing the clicking. Oh no, my water cup is empty. And then I'm going up into my brain. And so it was just making me think about the specific context and the more detailed analysis really of self-awareness and what it is that we can do to address it depending on what we need in that moment.
Yeah. And I think it always comes down to similar to what your colleague did in this auditioning room, which is ground yourself in the now. Part of the pun. There we go. That's a good name. But it really is like grounding my feet. And it's that classic of like, what can I feel? What can I hear? What can I see? What can I taste? What can I, those bringing my senses into this moment here so that my body reminds itself that I'm not fighting for my life. I'm just speaking, or I'm just going into this difficult conversation. And there's also techniques to do with I'll sit down with teams and we'll literally, they hate it, but we'll watch back video recordings that they've done of themselves. And I know it's the worst thing to do in the world for a lot of people. They hate their own voice, but every single time they go, oh my God, I literally had someone who said dude 21 times in a half an hour call because they just didn't realize it was like a filler word that was part of the culture. Or people who, are totally unaware of chewing the pen. It's an amazing feature that if anyone is listening to this and video records themselves for work, you need to be doing it. It's so helpful to do.
Uh, just letting the group know that we are just coming up to a 35-minute roughly mark. And we usually try to keep these between 30 to 40 minutes. Does anyone have any last remarks that they'd like to talk about being in the present? I think we've covered a lot of ground with this subject, but obviously there's always more that we can continue to dive into.
Just wanted to quickly do a quick plug, if I can, that in the summer, at some point, we will be running a taster workshop. If you're interested, please get in touch with us on the Instagram URL.
Great. Thank you all again for listening to the Now podcast. We will see you shortly. Take care, everyone.